and I'm going to start doing it. So this is what we did. This is our goal. Okay, so to take our video reference, and first of all to break it down into like more manageable sized chunks. Okay, and to do that, what we really want is we need to identify number one, the key poses. Okay, and those, well, you guys all know what key poses are. So the biggest, most contrasting poses and the biggest storytelling poses that we need to communicate both the story and then the mechanical movements itself. Okay, and then more than that, also to identify what the mechanical poses are that we actually need to be able to make these motions work in 3D. Okay, so it's literally breaking it down, saying I need all of these poses. So if this was just a walk cycle, then we would go through and identify the contact, the down, passing up, and the contact positions. No, it's mine. But you didn't say please. You're welcome. Now I have no idea what I was saying. So we also need to identify the mechanical poses of the animation, okay, which makes it easier for us, particularly since we're still figuring out how to animate and what we need. If we make sense of it here, which happens to be in After Effects, but we could probably do it anywhere, then we'll know that it'll make sense in Blender when we pop it out of constant mode. Okay, so basically we're going to find the poses that we are going to then start blocking into our animation. Okay, so for instance, this is the actual reference. Yeah, not that one, that one. Okay, so that's the reference. So pretend that the guy is acting the same style. And then what we need to do is we need to identify the poses from there. Okay, and the way that I like to do it is by making like a freeze frame version of it out of all the poses. So if this then makes sense, you can see each one of those little poses. If we know that we go and block in that pose and 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 that pose, then we should have enough to make this motion make sense. Okay, so if we're watching it here in 2D and it makes sense, and we can see how the character gets from one position to another, then by logic, if we do the same thing in Blender and use these as our main poses for our blocking, then we shouldn't have issues like feet sliding and all of that. Okay, we should have enough information there as well. So this is what I quickly want to show you today. From this, then we also need to do our key pose, our thumbnail drawings. Please bring it close to the direction. Our thumbnail drawings of the poses themselves, and together with those two, we should have enough to know exactly what we need to do when we start animating. Okay. So I'm just going to select another piece of this long giant clip of people doing stuff so I don't do the same thing again. So let's see, something with enough running and motion in it. It really doesn't matter, so I'm really just not you. So let's take this one. This is quite busy. Okay, so I'm just going to try and get there. Okay, so that little chunk over there. Okay, now first of all, once you guys have filmed all of your references, which you guys are still busy doing, I'm assuming, we obviously need to go and edit those, so we select the best bits out of all the text that you have to get to our final reference point. And that's the first thing that you guys need to do. Once you guys have all of your bits, you guys edit it together. Okay, so for instance, you would then go and drop everything into wherever you're editing it in, if it's in After Effects or in Premiere or in Blender even. We would then need a final edit of our animation, okay, which is that. Okay, let's just stop there. That seems to be long enough. So say now this is now we have all of your bits and pieces together. Okay, there's a few things that we need to do here as well. One of them is you need to add in your audio so that you have your audio here as well. And then on top of that, we do need some reference in terms of frame numbers. So if we add a new adjustment layer, which you can do by either going there and say new adjustment layer, you can also go over there and say new adjustment layer, or you can say Control-Alt-Y. We need to add a time code effect onto that. Okay, so it's the same as what you guys should have been doing for now, only in After Effects. Okay, the time code we need to set to be on frame numbers. Okay, and what I would do, just to make things easier, is since it starts on frame 0 and we don't actually have a frame 0, it's such a weird frame, I would just, instead of making your composition start on frame 1, which makes the rest of this very confusing, just slide your reference up so that it only starts in frame 1. Frame 0 can be blank, I don't mind. Okay, just so that the composition still starts in frame 0, which makes it a bit easier. Okay, once you have this, so this is now your edited final video reference of you acting out your piece. Then you have another layer with your audio, and you have that in as well. Okay, you can call this final acting reference. Okay, so there that you can export, and you have your final acting reference with the audio and the time, the frame number and everything. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to take this particular composition in After Effects, and we're going to chop it up to make all those freeze frames so we can identify the poses that we need. Okay. So it's just easier to interpret what it is that we're doing. To do that, I'm going to just drag the whole comp onto the new composition button, and that will make a new comp the same length and the same size and the same frame rate. Is this? Oh, that's one thing. We do need to make sure that the frame rate is correct. The frame rate needs to be 25. Okay, so just be aware of that. Okay, so that means this one will also be 25. Okay, so here what we do is to go and identify all our frames. The technical side of it, we need to duplicate this layer, and then the top one we can look at for all the movement, and then the bottom one we need to go and right click on it and say time freeze frame. Okay, what that will do is, as you probably have guessed, is actually freeze frame that. And whatever value this freeze frame is, that is the frame that is freeze framing on. Okay, so if we animate this, you'll see it's now added a new key over there, and on that frame it is now going to hold the position of frame 20. Okay, as you can see over there. Okay, so what we're going to do is on each one of our actual frames, so say now we want, that's our first frame, we can actually just set that to frame 1. Say that's our next frame. I'm just picking random numbers here. So what we do is we go and the frame number that we're on, we go and type that in over there on the frame that is happening. So that means it's going to return that off. It's going to hold frame 1 and then go to frame 17. Okay, now that's how we go about actually deciding or like saving our poses. Okay, now the way that I like to go about doing this, okay, is pretty meticulous and maybe overdone. But I've always found it very helpful, particularly just to, just to kind of comprehend what all is happening and the amount of poses that you need. And that is to look for obviously the extreme poses. So in your actual performance, you'll have bigger gestures and all of those things. But what I found is if we're looking at the mechanical poses that we need to actually go and block this out, every time something either changes direction or starts and stops moving, we need a frame, okay, or a pose or a freeze frame. Okay, so if you imagine every time he puts his foot down, it stops moving, and that would be a contact pose. Okay, and to remember we spoke about our moving holds last week. If we want that foot to stay on the ground, we need to then have another frame when he picks it up, when it starts moving again. Okay, so with the same logic, every time, if we want to convey these motions, we need to look at when things start and stop moving, particularly with the feet if there's a lot of footwork, because those things, those are things that have the most issues, I think, and slide the most. And then otherwise, the extreme poses, so the biggest poses, which will also happen to be when something is changing direction or starting and stopping. Okay, so if you have these big gestures, it would be at a point where the hand stops moving or changes direction. Okay, so that's the easiest way to identify it. Whenever anything on that frame changes direction or stops or starts, we need a pose. Okay, so let's just go through a bit of it and see exactly. So pretty much do what we did with the previous one. just as an example. Okay, so he starts pretty much there, and that is, so you see his foot is firmly on the ground there. Yours will be a little bit nicer to look at than this because this is quite small and bad quality and compressed. So, and then we go through it. Okay, so as I said, the one thing to look at are, I mean, if it's a run or a walk cycle, then we know pretty much what we're looking for. So we're looking for contacts and downs and passings and ups and all of that. Other than that, we know we're looking for things where they're making contact or starting or stopping or changing direction. Okay, so let's go through this a little bit and see. Okay, so if we look at main contact positions, okay, so you'll also notice that if you have filmed it on a different frame rate than what you're working in, then you'll see sometimes like over there you'll have double frames, and that would either have been in After Effects that is changing the video from 29 frames to 25, or the people who uploaded it, or wherever it happened. But just be aware that there will be double frames every now and then to compensate for frame rate things. Okay, so let's go and say, okay, if we look there, over there somewhere would be a contact position, so I'm going to save this frame. Okay, and all I'm going to do is look at what the frame number is, and it's 5, and I'm just going to type it in there, 5. That will make a key on the 5th frame. So if you look at what that's doing, there we go. Okay, in between there, I'll go back just now and get like all the passing positions and stuff that we need. For now, I'm just looking for the biggest, most important ones. So let's say that would be more or less a contact position. Okay, there's the last frame that foot's on the ground, so let's take that one. So that's on frame 9. Okay, from there, his foot, he flies, and there the foot makes contact, so I'm going to take that one. As I said, we'll go back for all the other big ones just now. Okay, so there the foot, that's the last time it's on the ground, from there it leaves, so let's take that one, 27. Contact position over there, I think, maybe it's that one already. Let's say that's a contact, 32. Loads double frames. Last time the foot's on the floor over there. You'll see I'm focusing on the feet first, so I'm just making sure I'm getting all of those feet poses, and then we'll go back and look at the rest of it. Contact. I can pretty much say that could be a contact instead. So 51. And last time it's moving on the ground there. Contact 72. So make it easy for yourselves. Like go through it and say, okay, I'm just looking for things for the feet. Okay, and then go, I'm looking for things for the hands or whatever it is. And then let's just take the last one that's there, 79. Okay, so if we just look at what that's doing, now we should have all of our contact positions in. So we don't have any more detail in. Okay, so now we can go back and take another look at it. Okay, so if we now look at more than just the contact positions and maybe say adding the up or the passing positions. Okay, so in which case we need that one. That would be a passing position, so let's say frame 7. Okay, so now we need to go and look over here. I'd say that's a pretty big one over there. So that's the first time his hands are, or his whole body is locking into that pose pretty much. So let's say 11. Okay, there that front hand, as you can see, kind of holds that pose and then there starts moving away. So I'm going to take this one as well. Okay, anything important happening over there? Not too much. but we could probably have one there. I don't know if it's necessary. Anyway, let's just go through it a bit more. Okay, I'm going to take that one, so that is more of a in between for those poses. Okay, from there to there. These double frames are a little bit annoying. Okay, pretty much a passing position, which we can use there. Okay, and look, from this one's quite a big one, so from there, that's also, I'd say that's a passing position, so we can take that one. Okay, those hands shoot out over there, so we can take that one for the hands. Contact. That would be like a passing position for the arms, kind of. And then going further into this section, there he's turned into a pole. Okay, so there those feet are dragging in and like touching his bum. So let's take that one. Okay, so that's also quite a big key pose there in terms of the pose itself. Going into there, and then whatever in between that little bounce. Okay, so that should give us a whole lot more info. So let's go and see what that looks like. Okay, it's pretty cool. There it feels like oh, he's actually flying. I thought he was jumping on the thing. So there you can see we have all the poses, particularly for our run and our walks, to make sense of what's happening over there. I think there we need a better in between. So I don't like that one. So there you can see there's a very small change between those two frames compared with that one. So a nicer in between over there would probably work better. So let's take that one out and see if there's not that would be better. So I'm going to take it and I'm actually going to move it a frame back, just so that it's spaced out a little bit nicer for our purposes. Hey. You actually need to add the number. So 26, type in 26, and then move 26 back. Otherwise, it was just moving the previous frame back. Okay, so that will then give us a better in between those two. Okay, that reads much better, as you can see. Okay, so much better passing position over there. Okay, so there it would be nice to have something more. Okay, so let's see what's happening in that section, even if it's just, I like that one. So it's where that leg really bends quite a lot, so 41. Okay, we can also space it out a little bit if we want to, but I think that should be fine. 3. That's the wrong one. Try that again. There we go. Okay, so you see that reads better as a motion between those few frames. Yeah, it's open because we're not having class right now. Okay, so there you can pretty much see exactly what, and that makes sense. So if you're watching that, you see all the places where the motions make sense. Now this becomes a little bit more difficult when you start just side note, since After Effects CC exporting things easily in any of Adobe stuff, the best way to do it is using Adobe Media Encoder. So, and it's also a nice way just to compress your files. So for instance, if you say Control-Shift// or composition add to render queue, which is also Control-M. That's a Premiere shortcut which they brought into this. You can also there just say add to media encoder queue. So in fact, let's just do that one. Let's just bypass this render queue entirely. Say media encoder queue. That's going to open media encoder. So they tried to consolidate or get a global media encoder for all their stuff. So that Premiere and After Effects and everything uses the same export module, if you want to call it that. And you can't export H.264 videos out of After Effects, so you need to go through media encoder. And H.264 is the easiest compression to use, since it does compress quite a bit, but still maintains relatively decent file quality if the settings are high enough. And that is what we need you guys to be using. So let's take a look. Oops, there goes someone's battery. Okay, so this is media encoder, right? In a second, we should have our actual comp popping up over there. There we go. So that is now our actual composition from here. What After Effects does is it actually saves a version of your file just like as you clicked export, which is good to know also because you can now you can go and close this if you wanted to. But it's also good to know if you ever lose a export or a composition or a file, so you have an export of something and you don't know which file it came from, which does happen, then you can go into your, there's a folder somewhere which should be in the same place where this is saved, which it isn't. And there'll be all of the actual saves which contains that comp. Okay, so it's a nice way if you did lose anything. If you have exported it, you can get the actual working file back. Okay, anyway, just in here, just so that you know, those are all your export settings, okay? All of the different file formats and compressions and whatever. The big ones over here is H.264. So anything that you need to send a preview to someone or upload for us, anything that's not needed for broadcast or anything like that, H.264 is great. It's really good for web. Okay, if you need anything bigger or better than that, you can use a whole bunch of other formats over here. QuickTime is a good one, okay? So QuickTime also now has the options of exporting Apple ProRes, which is like an industry standard, but only recently came to PC, like end of last year, recently. So that's a great one. So if you ever need to export anything for broadcast or whatever, that's something that all the film people use ProRes. Anyway, just some extra info. Okay, so H.264 is a good one. I just leave literally the same settings that it has. If you need to adjust the settings, you can click over there, which will open this thing up. Thinks about it for a while. And in there is some stuff that you can change as well. So the biggest things over here is if you scroll down in this video tab, you can set the bitrate, yeah, of your file. Okay, so by default it has a target and a maximum of 10 and 12. Now if you really wanted this file smaller, it tells you over there what the estimated file size is. I mean, sometimes you may do something that's 5 minutes long and it needs to be for Facebook or whatever, and it really needs to be a small file, then you can drop this target bitrate. Okay, like 6 and 6 is still good. If you go much smaller than that, then it's going to start losing quality. Okay, anyway, so those two numbers are the actual settings that you can change. If you need to change the size, you can do that over there if you wanted to, and the output location you can save here somewhere. So I'm just going to save it to my hard drive. Okay, save that, say OK, and it's going to spit out. So all the video files that you export for me and upload for school, H.264, just the standard settings should be good enough. Okay. I know some video files can be massive. Don't ever, if you can help it or avoid it, use an AVI. They tend to be it's a very old technology or format. And that should give you this, which is going to open in this stupid thing. Good. Nice end frame. Okay, so there are all of our key poses. Now, what do we do with them once we have those? Okay, that's the big thing. Okay, I'm just going to save this as well. Not that I need it, but just in cases. Okay, the big thing now, once we have this, is actually converting or making sense of this once again. Let me just go get to it again. I like VLC. Okay, so there we have all of our poses that we know we need to get in there. We also have more or less the frame numbers that we need to block them out on, okay? Ideally, I'd like you guys to get to a point where you're animating where you don't need to know these frame numbers and you rather interpret it for yourself. So you say, I want him to take about 2 seconds to jump over this wall, and you know that's 50 frames, so I need about 20 frames between this one and that one, and 5 frames between that one. But that kind of thing you're really only going to start getting into with a lot of practice and a lot of experience in animating. Okay, so it's not something I expect you to be able to do right now. So using the frame numbers of the actual reference is fine. Okay, it really is okay. We can always go and adjust the timing later in Blender from there on. Okay. Now the big thing that we need to do from here is, okay, it's great, we have our poses, but I mean actually taking this and making our characters look the same isn't always just as straightforward as what it seems. Okay, particularly since we are still new at it, and that's why we need to go and do all of our thumbnail drawings. Okay, so the thumbnails that you guys have been doing for your exercises up until now, we just need to make sure that, as we said, that is a really good way of processing these poses and understanding the mechanical side of what's happening in the poses. Okay, so we need to look at the entire pose and the entire body. Okay, when you guys are posing your characters, it should be the case that you're literally adjusting like 90% of the rig. Okay, in terms of the silhouette of your character, if you're just looking at the change in the silhouette, on every single pose, there shouldn't ever be a time where any portion of your character's silhouette stays the same over a frame. Okay, unless they're making contact with it. Okay, so unless you want it to. So we saw a lot last week that people would, over 2 key poses, like just literally move the foot, or not move the foot. So move the whole body, but the foot and the foot roll stay in the same place. So that literally has been keyed in the same position over 2 frames. So we're keying it in to not move. And if that's not our intention, then that's generally a bad thing. We want our character to move the whole time, since we don't ever just freeze up, okay, when we're moving. And that is why this one phase of drawing thumbnails based on this, particularly now since we know it, is a really good and really important thing to do. And what I want you guys to focus on, first of all, is to look at the character's hips and shoulders. Okay, so if you imagine, if we have a character rig and we rotate the hips, okay, that immediately does a massive amount for our whole pose. Okay, so both legs will move as a result. Okay, the entire lower half of our torso moves. If we rotate our shoulders as well, then our arms and our head are also going to move. So literally, just by turning our shoulder control or our chest control and the hip control on our characters, we'll change the silhouette of the whole character. Okay, so those 2 are particularly important, and that's what I want you guys to start off with. Okay, so if we were to take, let's just take one of these poses. Let's take that one for instance. Okay, and when you go and draw these, if you do them on paper or whatever it is, I'm just going to draw it here so you guys can see. Okay, there we go. How do I make that smaller? Okay, so as I was saying, if we focus on the hips and the shoulders, okay, we're already going to get a nice curvature in our spine, and if our feet were flat on the floor, that means that leg is going to be ultra straight, and that leg is going to be very bent, and everything up there is going to move as well. Okay. Now, again, I just want to remind you guys, these drawings don't need to be pretty, but they do need to be detailed. Okay, so we do need to put a lot of information into these sketches. And where I generally begin is with the torso. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. Okay, first of all, the torso. And if we just look at this dude, we can clearly see that the one shoulder is elevated more than the other. Also, that he is on a z-axis rotated in that direction. So this shoulder is more forward than that shoulder. Okay, so we know that his shoulder is rotated there, and also that that shoulder is rotated up a little bit. So that shoulder is definitely higher than that shoulder, which is somewhere behind him. Okay, so when I do these, I really like to make sure I have the elbows and the knees and the shoulders as physical objects, so I can make sure that I have those standing out. Okay. If we then look at what the torso, what the hips are doing, that leg is up, that leg is down. So just by the mechanics of our walk cycle, we know if this leg is in front and up, that hip needs to be up as well. And it is also nicely contrasting what the upper body is doing. Okay, so I know that there, my hips need to be rotated in that particular direction. Okay, which means our spine is doing something more or less like so. Okay, from there, say if those are the hips, we have the one leg going more or less parallel to the ground, and that leg coming out at a bit of an angle. Okay, try and match the angles of your drawing and the poses. Okay, on all limbs particularly. Okay, so look at the feet also. If like, what is the foot's angle in relation to the ground? What is the humerus's angle in relation to something else? Really, so that we can kind of match these poses as good as possible, or as nicely as possible. Okay, so there the foot is more or less up. This back leg we don't really see too much, but it's going at an angle like that. The knee, okay, shins coming up, and the foot is more or less flat behind there. Okay, ankle. So you see, I'm literally drawing that same character that we're animating with, to make sure we know what's going on. Okay, the back arm, we can't really see too clearly, but it's going dead straight behind him. Okay, so for shortening, it's going to do that to his hand. And his hand is a little bit flat, but relaxed and open. So I'm really not focusing too much on what that's doing with the thumb. Okay, the arm in the front is coming pretty much at like a 1 o'clock kind of angle. Okay, so it's a little bit more forward, and then the elbow and the forearm is also more or less parallel to the ground. Don't know what the hand's doing, but let's just open it up a little bit. And then his head is somewhere behind his arm. Okay, his head's pretty much neutral, so whatever his head's doing, there's not too much going on over there. Okay, that is what we need to do. Okay, and it's, as I said, it doesn't need to be a aesthetically pleasing drawing. It needs to be it's a mechanical drawing. It's more technical drawing than anything else. Okay, and it's angles. It's all angles. Okay, it's rotations of things and angles. And from this, now we know those, like literally, those are all the controls that we need to go and pose out in our drawing. And we need to make sure that this represents that clearly. So if we know that each one of these objects needs to be changed on each one of our poses, our animation is going to be so much richer, and our poses are going to be so much more interesting because we have put so much detail in the actual pose itself. Okay, and that is very, very important. This then we need to go and do, first of all, for all of our key poses, okay, so that it makes sense, so that we can see, we break it down. It's less a process of, it's more a process of having done it than having the physical drawing in the end. So just by going through the pose and looking at each limb and each joint and making sure we understand what's happening in the drawing, that's the important part. Okay, it helps us mentally understand the pose more than anything else. The other thing that we need to do, for instance, so you guys all remember the character that I'm going to be using, that giant dude that Sean's busy rigging. Now, if he were doing this, obviously, we need to go and draw these thumbnails in that character and your character's proportions. Okay, so that's the first time we're now taking, that's the other point of this reference. We're taking our reference of whatever person it is and we're noting the pose itself. The thing we then need to do also in our thumbnail is to apply that pose to our character. Okay, now particularly not all characters' proportions are the same and not all people's proportions are the same. So it's also a point where we can figure out if there are going to be any issues with animation, if we need to change anything. So for instance, if we have a character with really short arms or a really big head, and you have him scratching his ear like this, and he actually can't get his hand over there, then we need to update that and realize, okay, well, we can't do that. What else are we going to do? Okay, which is very important. So let's just see if I can find that character that I was working on. It's on here somewhere, so we can look at it. Not there. Desktop. Okay. Okay, so this dude. Okay, so if we now had to do the same thing, but now in terms of this character, okay, then we need to go and do that. So let's just also just so we can remember. Okay. So let's see. So the same things would apply, but now we just need to go and do it so that it looks like this dude. Okay. Let's just scroll down a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so for instance, we're doing the same thing now, but now it's this dude. So again, starting with the upper body, okay, his which is slightly more prominent, okay, it's like he's like a big feature on him, okay, and also bigger shoulders that he has. Okay, the hips are then very small in relation to what it is that we have over there. Okay, so that shoulder is up and hip is up and forward. This one is small and backwards. Okay. Okay. So he's actually got a bit more of a bulk on his belly as well. So that would probably mean that that leg lifting up would then push up against his belly. It wouldn't just be up in the air. Okay. So very short legs. Okay, very short legs. So we need to now take note of, and also very small feet. Okay. So all of those things we need to make sure we're aware of when we're doing this, to make sure that there aren't any blatant issues. Okay, other foot behind him, somewhat like that. Okay, this arm then coming up and forward, since he's got very chunky arms, somewhat like that. And that other arm going backward over there somewhere. Okay, head. Big head. Okay, so that's not very clear because I've scratched a lot. So just that, just a little bit clearer, would really give us an idea of what this dude is going to look like when he does it. Okay, and if there were any issues, we would identify it here as well. Okay, so again, doesn't have to be pretty. Adjust the proportions. If there are bigger features, then we need to make sure that that's in place, or smaller, or shorter, or longer, or whatever it is. We need to make sure that all of those things are there. Okay. Any questions in that regard? Okay. So for this week, Thursday, you guys need to have your final, finished, updated acting references here. Okay. For next week, then you need to go and do everything that I've showed you now. Okay. Week 8, we present it all together. Okay. Also, next week we're going to look at, that's not all, I say for next week you need to do this, then for week 8 you need to have the rest of it done, which is there where we go and take this and start setting it up at least in Blender. So we need to have a basic layout of our environment, and that's literally just going to be primitive objects. So if we have any walls or tables that it needs to interact with, that is in place for us to start animating with so long. We're going to place our cameras so that you know what the basic camera is, basically doing the layout for animation. And then loading all of our footage and reference and sound into Blender so that from day 1 of next module, we're ready to start animating. Cool. Yes. Planning and body mechanics. If, just to confirm that for you. Animation planning and body mechanics. Yes. Okay. Cool. Okay. Anyway, that's it. We're done a bit early. From now, all the animation, you can still work on it until your presentation in week 8. So you have the rest of the term to finish that off. You're welcome to bring it in. We can still give you guys feedback. You can also upload it on Hangouts. If you not on Hangouts, on Classrooms. If you upload it from here, just replace the. I think there is a assignment for each exercise. So just update that one the whole time. And if you update it, it is good to send me the blend file, because then if there are any technical issues, I can look at it and I can see if the rotations are wrong or whatnot. And then send it there. If I do tend to, I try to get to them if you guys do upload them throughout the week. Sometimes I don't, in which case we look at it in class. But I do try. Just let me know. So like drop me an email and just say, if you have a moment, check this out, and I'll do my best. Okay. So yeah, all of those. Basically, the next actual submission is week 8's presentation. Okay. Questions? Nothing? Cool. That's it. Good luck. I will see you guys on